how's it going? Thank you very much for listening to Born Optimistic. Sitting here in Born Optimistic Towers with 40% of one of the finest Irish groups ever. Joe and Steve Wall, thank you so much. I should have said Steve and Joe, because you're there, Steve, and you're there, Joe. How's it going? Thanks for coming in.
It's good to be here. I like your very accurate percentage work there. I think it's accurate anyway.
Got it. Now, I have to start by asking, so you haven't heard the show, so you're at a loss here. Because it's called Born Optimistic, the first question is always regarding optimism and where you fit on the optimism spectrum. Steve?
I'd say I'm naively optimistic. In my old middle age, I think I've always been naively optimistic. I think my naivety has gotten me this far. If I was to really know what life was like, I don't think I would have been quite so optimistic. So my naivety has propelled me along to where I am, and I'm still as naive as fuck. And that's what keeps me going. The less I know, the better.
Joe?
I'd say I'd be more, what's the word, oscillating on the optimism scale. I'd be ridiculously optimistic at some points, and then I'd sort of slump down to less optimistic. But I think as I've gotten older, I think it's more steady. It's more of a steady as she goes optimism. But sure, you have to be, don't you? You have to be optimistic, especially if you're a musician these days. You have to be optimistic. You've got no choice in the matter.
Well, I kind of feel, though, you mentioned naive optimism, Steve. Like, for me, I feel that it's my task, as a parent in particular, to remain as naive as possible for as long as possible and to try and foster that. And were you always like this? Were you born this way, or is it something you just kind of clicked into, do you think?
No, I think I was kind of born that way. I think it's pretty much the way I'm wired. Or not wired. I don't really think I'm a wired person, although I would have my wired days, all right. Yeah, I think it's sort of... I was always sort of fascinated by that whole idea of like a sense of wonder. And I think consciously I've probably... Once I became aware of that and the sense of wonder, I remember even doing it in school, in the Patrick Kavanagh poem, Advent. And I remember our English teacher at the time talking about this line, through a keyhole there appears much wonder. And I remember he explained it, and he said, that's like if you're down on your knees, you're looking through a keyhole and everything looks bigger and more interesting on the other side of it. And I remember actually that sort of, the fact that I can still remember that, something from like, that was said in like 1979 to me. Do you know what I mean? I can still remember that. So I think that sort of, the seed of that has probably always been growing in my head. Just try and retain a kind of a sense of wonder about things.
And Joe, what do you attribute your oscillations to? Can you remember?
Well, I was actually thinking about all this quite a lot recently, and even, when as a musician, as an artist, as a person, you always have to sort of take stock of where you're at and kind of figure out what are we going to do next and stuff like that. And I think for me, the optimism really is linked to when I have a vision for something I want to do, and when I have a kind of an idea of the next goal and it becomes clear, and then suddenly everything falls into place and my whole outlook changes, So I think that's the key thing for me. If I know where I've got to get to, and I can see there's the goal, that's what I need to do, and I get excited about it, then the oscillation bar, the mercury goes up the tube and almost blows it off. But if I don't know what I've got to do, and I'm kind of feel like I'm in the doldrums, then I would be less optimistic, I have to admit.
Well, you were late today, Joe, struggling with Apple Maps as opposed to Google Maps. Steve told me two things I never knew before. Number one was that Steve was born in London. And number two, that there's actually 5 Wall siblings. I didn't know Helen existed before today. Yeah. So, and a few years ago, I learned that you weren't actually born in Ennistimon, that you moved there. So for me, as a country boy who moved to Dublin age 17, I'd like to talk about ye moving from Dublin to Ennistimon and when that was and fitting in, and was there culture shock? What age were you, Steve, when you moved?
13. You know, you just have a listen to The Wall's Bird in a Cage. The whole story is in that song, condensed into a handy 3 minutes, 20 seconds.
On your show.
Just play the song.
Well, you know that the station this goes out on doesn't allow music. RT Radio 1 Extra. It's a music-free zone, believe it or not. So you could share as a choice sample of the lyrics from Bird in a Cage.
I was 13 when we packed up in the city and moved out west to a town in the country. Everybody thought that we were so lucky, but I wasn't all that sure. Can you ever really take the city from the boy? What's the next
Well,
line?
the first thing I missed was
all
all
the
the
noise. The first thing I missed was all the noise. It was so damn quiet, I found it hard to sleep at night.
Actually, it wasn't that quiet down in Ennistimon. There was always somebody getting thrown out of a pub and causing ructions on the street.
Because you lived on the main street, didn't you?
Yeah, we lived on the main street. No, it was a huge change. It was a huge, I suppose, a culture shock is probably a good way to describe it. In some ways, it was really quaint, you know, going from Dublin down to Clare and in Ennistimon. I mean, just the vision of seeing like guys with donkeys and carts, and he would bring the milk to the creamery in the morning and all that kind of stuff, and fellas in their sort of like passed down, hand-me-down clothes coming to school in sort of hand-me-down suits and stuff like this. Yeah. You know,
I had just started first year in Temple Oak College, and we watched Top of the Pops every Thursday, and we had BBC and UTV and all of that. And then we moved down there where there was like, fellas, you know, farmers with a donkey and cart taking the milk to the creamery in the morning, and
I suppose
one channel we had a black and white TV in a little room at the back of the shoe shop, and there was only one channel on it, television, RT1.
Were you annoyed with your parents for making this move? Did you feel your opinion came into it, or how did you feel?
I don't think it registered with me at all like that. I think one of the things was that we would always go down to Clare for summer holidays. Like until I had left school, I had never been on a foreign holiday. The first foreign holiday I was ever on was with myself and Steve and Jimmy and Derek. We went off to Portugal years later. But we'd never been on a foreign holiday, but we would always go down to Clare while we lived in Dublin, we'd go down there for the summer. And we saw it as we kind of associated Clare with holidays, no school, and Lahinch and the beach and all that stuff and all the kind of like the crack that goes on with that. So when we moved down there, we just thought it was going to be a continuation of that. And it didn't really dawn on me that there was going to be Christian Brothers involved or, you know, the nuns or any of that kind of stuff. So that was a bit of a shock once we got into the sort of the reality of going to school and
Well, I knew. I mean, I'm the eldest, so I had a fair idea of what was happening, and I was actually really happy in Temple Oak College, and I didn't want to go. So they gave me the choice to stay in Dublin, live with my cousins and aunt and uncle in Rathfarnham, and that they'd okayed. They said, look, you can live with them and continue school. And I didn't. I mean, we're a close family, so I didn't want to be away from the family, so I just said, all right, then I've got to go. But I didn't want to go, and I know I was deeply unhappy for at least a year before I started to make some friends and just get used to it, you know. But the thing that affected me the most was that the school was just so basic, you know, and the Christian Brothers, you know, there were a couple of them, actually I think they were insane, you know, and they're not a good place for any kid. You know,
it was the same. Steve went into secondary school, and I think he went into first year, second year. I went into
second year.
He went into second year. I went into fifth class in the primary school, and I remember the boys in the class were warning me that the teacher was psychotic, and like the day before he had smashed a lot of furniture off the piano in the class, and various fellas were getting belted and stuff like that. So that was all quite a shock, because we came from a more of like we actually went to school just across the road from here in St. Joseph's primary school in Turnier, and it was kind of more of a kind of a relaxed atmosphere in general. You know, most of the teachers were a bit more relaxed, and I remember the teacher used to spend half the time teaching us rebel ballads and stuff like that, Mr. McKeown, and he was a bit of a hippie, and it was a little bit more the swing in Dublin scene, so like it was a whole different story going down to Clare, and they seemed to really take it seriously, like if you didn't know something, you'd get a belt of those big wooden compasses where the
It's mad, is it, that we
remember
all
the
went through
Buntu's
that?
Concha. The Buntu's Concha was this Irish class, and it was like a military operation where the boys would be lined up, and I remember they seemed to have some sort of overhead projector thing where they would show slides, but you've always been tested, and of course if you didn't know something, you'd get the wallop of the compass, So there wasn't, there wasn't an awful lot of fun in the learning, if you know what I mean. But yeah, it took a while to find our feet there.
And when did music come into the mix? And was music like your salvation, or had you already kind of come through to the other side before music kind of arrived?
I think music was definitely a kind of a salvation. But music had been sort of implanted in our heads while we lived in Dublin. And a lot of that came from the house that we grew up in first. It was in our grandparents' house in Harold's Cross. I think I was about 4 years old when we moved from London to here. Our mother was from the Liberties in Dublin, and our father's from Ennistimon. So we were living here first, but in the grandparents' house, like my mother had 6 sisters. There were 6 girls and 1 boy. So the house was full of records. There was the Dynatron, you lift up the lid, old record player. So the records were, there was the grandfather's record, Paddy's records, which was stuff going back to Glenn Miller and Cole Porter and the crooners,
Tony Bennett,
Sinatra, Brooke Benton, Perry Como. So there was all of those kind of Andy Williams. There was all of that sort of stuff. And then there were all the sisters, the girls. So my mother had stuff like Sarah Vaughan. She loved Ella Fitzgerald, Burt Bacharach stuff, Dionne Warwick, all that kind of stuff. And then you could see that, then there was the Beatles. There was the other aunts that were slightly younger. There were the Beatles albums. And then an aunt Eleanor, who lives down in Ranelagh now, she ended up working for K-Tel Records then. So the house was full of these K-Tel compilations,
It's like Top of the Pops.
Yeah. With like David Essex and
All the
Wizard,
cheese.
all the cheese. But so there was loads of vinyl. So from a fairly young age, I'd say I was probably around 6 years old when I was actually shown how to put a record on the turntable, and it was those automatic ones. The whole thing, it did it itself, apart from turning itself over. But and I never forget actually when I put on. I think it was like, I can't remember, was it Please Please Me or Revolver or Sgt. Pepper's, one of those Beatles albums, and just being blown away by it. And that was the start, definitely. So and as well as that, in the house, it was a very kind of, there was a lot of parties in the house. Like my grandparents were very sociable. So there'd be big gatherings if it was someone's birthday or Christmas, whatever. And there were great sing-songs. It was very different to a country sing-song. There was no ballads being sung. It was all jazz, and like even great uncles of ours, my mother's uncles, they'd sing stuff like I've Got You Under My Skin and King of the Road, and all these songs from the 40s, the American Songbook from the 40s. They were the songs that were being sung at these family gatherings. So we didn't really hear any sort of like, we got the rebel songs at school from the national school, from the teachers.
And did you bring this record collection to Ennistimon with you? Did many of these records make the journey?
Maybe 1 or 2 did that maybe shouldn't have. But no, most of those ones stayed in the house. They were their records. But we were very, like at that stage, we were buying records and stuff. And, that was one of the things that when we got down to Ennistimon, we would go on pilgrimages to come to Dublin, maybe just to buy a record, like you could hitch down to Ennis. Yeah, I'd hitch down to Ennis and maybe get a bus from there or a train and come up to Dublin, and could spend all day traipsing around just to go to one of the record shops. What was the one up on it was upstairs on Grafton Street?
Freebird was there.
Freebird, yeah. I remember going in there and buying like a what was it, Psychic TV album and the Virgin Prunes single, and probably then getting the bus back down to the train station, down to Ennis, and hitching home again. You know, so we go to great lengths to get a hold on music that we wanted.
You had to, like, I mean, we didn't have much money. You'd saved up pocket money, and records were expensive. So you really had to know what you want. I mean, we spoke about this earlier, like that you don't just buy an album to check it out. You would have done your research. You might have heard it in someone else's house, or someone might have taped it on the, you know. I remember we taped records by holding one of those flat cassette players, you know, the built-in microphone, holding that up to a record player and taping albums that way.
Like before the 3-in-1s. Before the
3-in-1 came along. And by the way, 3-in-1 is not a bag of chips and fish to all those younger listeners. It's not like it's not oil. It was a stereo that had a tape deck, a radio, and a turntable all in the one unit. I remember when our father bought a 3-in-1, and my God, it was like probably the equivalent today of getting a computer. But I remember listening to Dave Fanning's show. I mean, one thing about moving down there, I always had this feeling of being cut off from the rest of the world. And the reason was, I think, that we'd come from Dublin, where we knew there was other shit out there. There was the Dandelion Market, where you could go and look at crazy people and bands playing. And then there was, there was multi-channel television and all this kind of stuff. You were just more being open to sort of culture. You were seeing people and talking to people that were into all kinds of music and sharing music. So we went down there, and the record shops in Ennis just stocked show band records. You know, like stuff that the album covers look like Ireland's own. And I always had this feeling of that there was amazing stuff going on in the rest of the world, and I was missing it. Oh. And that's the feeling I grew up with. So,
but then music, did you channel that? Without that feeling, would you have ever started making your own music?
That's the thing. Possibly not. Oh, yeah. Possibly not. So
it's true of an awful lot of, like, a lot of great music often comes out of kind of deprived situations, doesn't it? Like, you know, like when you think of all the great music that's come out of, like, the estates in Manchester and Liverpool, and, you know, even the Beatles actually came from fairly kind of working class backgrounds, and there is something, I suppose, in that sometimes, that sense of kind of being deprived drives you to fill that vacuum with your own stuff, you know. I think there was a bit of that. I mean, we used to like the work that we'd put into sourcing music. We go to great lengths. Like, we had this 3-in-1 records or radio cassette deck record player thing that we had down in Clare. I know that, yeah. We had that rigged up to the.
You were listening.
We had that rigged up to the central heating system to get better reception in the house down in Clare, because the Ennis Diamond is in a dip. It's in a bit of a hole.
So we couldn't get FM radio.
So we could only get medium wave. So we had the aerial of that rigged up to the central heating system, and we would tape. Steve actually was in college for a lot of when the PJ Curtis House and Rock and Blues used to be on. So I used to tape that it was a Friday or a Saturday night it used to be on. And that was that was a real eye-opener. That opened up a whole new world of blues that we hadn't really discovered at that point. So that was amazing, and really kind of got I suppose both of us have really been into the likes of Howlin' Wolf and John Lee Hooker and all that kind of blues stuff on account of that show.
When did the notion occur that you could make music, that this was something you could do?
I remember, our dad bought this cheapo guitar at an auction. It was like a really difficult thing to play. I remember we had a couple of basic guitars, and I got a Beatles songbook, and it had the chord diagrams in, and we knew the songs backwards, knew the lyrics and all, knew them all off by heart. So we'd just sit down at the book, and you'd figure out the chords from the diagrams and all that, and it was gradually started to play. And then we got like a Led Zeppelin songbook, which is a bit little bit harder, but we were mad into Led Zeppelin, and started to figure out. So we were sort of self-taught on the guitar, and then there was a local guy called James Barry who lived a couple of doors down from us in Ennistimon. He was a really good guitarist. I remember getting a few lessons off him as well.
Right from the start, was it the pair of you together? Like, were you cohorts or?
No, really. Not really. No. I mean, I didn't. A lot of that period, it didn't really occur to me to write songs. Actually, I was more interested in sort of like picking out the riffs from stuff I was hearing, and rewind and play it again, and try and kind of learn how to play stuff. I remember I used to write actually a lot of poetry at that time while I was in school. But actually writing a song it didn't really occur to me. I was kind of, as I say, it was more about learning from other people. It was only later on when it kind of, when we had the band up and running, I kind of felt, geez, we need to start writing some songs here. Can't just play cover versions.
Yeah.
What was that, the story about the priest lending you the amp and you...
Oh, yeah. I remember swapped all my Action Man. I had a few Action Men and all the various stuff, the parachutes and the tanks, all that kind of stuff. But I swapped a cousin of ours, Roger, who lived down in Ennis, had some cheapo, like a Woolworths electric guitar or something. And I was fascinated by this. Anyway, I swapped all my Action Man gear for this electric guitar. So then I had an electric guitar, but of course he couldn't play it. And I remember one time there was one of those sort of religious ceremonies, an outdoor mass or something in the square in Ennistimon, one of those religious processions, And I noticed that the priest had a microphone plugged into a guitar amp. It was a Yamaha guitar amp, and I was just staring at this thing and thinking, right, I've got the guitar, he's got the amp, how do I introduce the two? And so I called around to the priest, and I can't remember what I said, but he lent me the amp. So I went back around to our place. Myself and Joe's bedroom was on the top floor, overlooking the main street, and I hauled the thing right up to our bedroom. I put the amp up on the windowsill. I opened the window, turned every knob up on it, plugged this thing in, and it was like hell of feedback. And then I just started playing Led Zeppelin's Whole Lot of Love, and it was it was like lunchtime from school. So all the girls from the convent, the kids from the tech, all the boys from the brothers, everyone's milling around the town. And I was like, and it was echoing all around up the main street and all that. And people looking around to see where is it coming from. And then eventually someone sussed it. I remember there was a guard running around and everything. And then my dad came running up the stairs. Someone had gone into the shop and said, your son is up there creating havoc, creating mayhem, noise pollution, whatever. And so my dad came up and says, what are you doing? And that was, I suppose, my first gig.
Did you get a rush off that hooked you in?
Great, just the sound of an amp. It was my first time, I think, ever playing an electric guitar, and just the rush from it was fantastic. Just that, an amp being driven beyond. It was only used to a priest whispering quietly into it, and now we had a Woolworths guitar at full blast.
So we can thank the church.
We can thank the church. Father Ford, actually. Father Ford. Thanks, Father Ford.
And if someone was to say to you, when you were kids, that all these years later you would have spent all this time together in bands together, would you have believed it, or would you have gone, yeah, of course, so we're going to spend our lives really, really closely intertwined?
Yeah, I don't think there was any particular plan to do that or anything like that. Yes, so I suppose it is kind of, yeah. To answer your question, if somebody said that back then, I probably would have said probably not. You know what I mean? And not just being in a band with Steve, but even to be in a band and to the band we started back in 1987, to be still in that band 30 years ago playing those songs. I think I probably would have said it's highly unlikely. You know what I mean? Because even back then, I think, when you think about bands say, the Beatles, were on the go for 7 years, and then any other band that went on longer than that seemed to be just like dinosaurs, having a kind of a 10-year kind of career as a band and staying together for that long just seemed to be it's such a long time. And I suppose the concept of time, as you get older, your concept of time changes anyway. So yeah,
But even beyond the, so like from a almost like a family business perspective, like you grew up in a family business, you lived above the shop. Was it your, like, maybe you don't see the studying as a part family business, but you're so, that intertwined thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Like it felt a lot longer, but the Stunning were only actually together for, was it 7 years?
7 years.
When the band split in '94.
Yeah.
And then myself and Joe, formed the Walls, and because we wanted to do something different musically, and we wanted the freedom to be able to work with different people and all of that. So the Walls actually is still kind of there. The Walls haven't broken up or anything like that. We have another album that we want to put out of all unreleased material. It's great, actually.
Oh, God. I met John O'Connell last week, and I was like, so John, the Walls have broken up. And John was looking at me like I had two heads. Now I understand why you haven't broken up at all.
Why,
Sorry, John O'Connell.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's so the Walls...
I gave him his notice last week. I was like, the band. He was looking at me all lost. Sorry, this is the Walls bass player. He was looking at me all lost and hurt, and now I understand why.
Yeah. I just think, announcing breakups and all this sort of stuff is, what's the point, Just leave it there, do other things. I think the music has changed now a lot anyway. People are collaborating and they're doing things under different guises and all of that. I think that's good, There's no reason to... but the Walls actually put out 3 albums that we're very proud of. And the Wall... When did the first Walls album came out? In 2000, High Low. 2000, yeah. So before that... that's 17 years ago was the first Walls album. So that, the Walls are going, we're going longer than the Stunning. The Stunning's initial thing was 7 years. Yeah. So the Walls have been going longer. And probably the Walls got out there more as well in terms of gigs abroad and all of that. We would have, Australia, the States, Europe, Middle Europe, Czech Republic, Poland and all that. We actually, our tentacles, we pushed it a lot more. Outside of Ireland. So,
but the 2 new Stunning songs that came out this year, would they have happened? Would they have been Wall songs if the Walls weren't in some state of suspended animation? Or, like, I have this thing in general with my life that you can have one thing that's your main thing, and it's very hard to have 2 main things. I don't know. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, it is, definitely, yeah. I mean, what started, in a way, I suppose, okay, this sounds like a dramatic statement, but in a way, the Stunning did not help the Walls in any way in terms of the Wall. We'd put out like the 3rd Walls album in 2012, but the Stunning had already started to do stuff. And there was just seemed to be just such a demand and a hunger for have the Stunning back doing things that when we would go into radio stations to do an interview or a session or something like that, they would literally scratch their heads and go, "Who are you today, lads? Are you the Walls or the Stunning?" What? I remember someone said, like, I think it was Ian Dempsey or something said one day, "So what hat are you wearing today? Are you the Walls or the Stunning?" And I was like, we became very aware that there was confusion there. And amongst the people who you're kind of working alongside, people in the media and all that.
Was that hard for you emotionally? Forget business side of things. Was that hard? Kind of go, well, we want to do both.
I suppose it was with the last couple of Walls albums. I mean, I think they're really strong albums, and they probably could have done better. But the fact that the brand was the less popular of the 2 affected that, So that was a difficult one, especially with the last one, because we put a ridiculous amount of work into it and time, and it didn't sell as well as it should have done, and it didn't get the airplay that it should have done. I suppose all bands would say that, so it's my personal view. But that was hard to kind of like put all that work in and to produce a great album, and for not to hit home as much as it should have,
Does that, when an album isn't successful or as successful as you want it to be, I assume that doesn't change the way you feel about the songs?
No, not at all. Not at all.
No, I think our best work is on that Stop the Lights album, and I mean our best work in all the Stunning stuff as well in our whole catalogue. I think that album really stands out as we were I don't know, we put a lot of work into it, but the songs are great and really happy with the production. I just think it's great, it's nice to be able to listen back to something you did and still actually like it. And that's the case. And then you have people like Dan Hegarty who put his book together, it was Sunken Treasures or Lost Treasures or what was it called again? He put a couple of them out, and he included High Low in the first one. And it's really nice when you get sort of feedback from someone who says, years later, I still listen to that album and it's great. There's another guy, Ronan Casey in Mullingar, used to write for the Westmeath Examiner. Like, he's a huge fan of that album, of our first album. And then we were doing a video, The Stunning did a video a few weeks ago with Miles O'Reilly, and I said to Cormac, on the phone a couple of days beforehand, I said, Cormac, Miles O'Reilly, do you know Miles? And he said, I know that name. I said, he had a band called Juno Falls. And Cormac's like, I love that album. He says, so when he came up and he met Miles, they walked into the studio on the north side, D-Light Studios, and Cormac just said to him, he named this song on the album, he says, one of my favourite songs ever. And Miles was blown away by it. So it's kind of, I think you do grow attached to your stuff, and if the quality is there and you put your fucking heart and soul into it, you won't fall out in love with the songs because the album didn't do well.
Well, you do have to, sometimes the appreciation comes through in the long term, and that's the funny thing about it, that it takes time, and we've always spent a really long time on recording albums, and sometimes if we feel a song just we might have put a lot of work into recording a song, and if you feel it just doesn't have the spark, we'd re-record it again, and we'd try and capture some kind of magic, and if it doesn't have that, we wouldn't want to go with it, Do
you think about why you do what you do? What's in it? Why? Literally, what are the things?
See, that's where the naive optimism comes in, Donald. That's sort of being naively optimistic. If you were to actually think about why, I don't think we'd do it.
Mr. Oscillation?
Yeah. I think at the very bottom line, I think you want to make a kind of an emotional connection with people in the music.
Steve, emotion, Steve.
Yeah. And whether that's kind of like a melancholy or like sexual or whatever, above the hips or below the hips. I think that's one thing that we've always felt, that there has to be, with the music that we make, you have to feel that vibe off it yourself. You have to feel that sort of, you're getting something from it. Because if we don't feel it as musicians, then you can't expect any listeners to,
What do you think is the difference between the types of songs both of you write, and what do you think that reflects about the difference in your natures and personalities?
Jeez, that's a difficult one. That's a difficult one. I think we both write fairly diverse stuff. Yeah, it's
each other so well. So when you were talking about above the waist and below the waist, I was like, is there one of them who's more below the waist and another one who's more above the waist?
Will anybody know what we're talking about when we say that?
I think I write simpler songs, and I think Joe's songs are more complex.
And what does that reflect about you as people? Is that this? Are you simpler than Joe?
No, he's actually a better guitar player than me, and he can do these sort of fiddly things because he's got big bass player's hands. And he'll go, "Why can't you do that?" And I go, "My little finger just doesn't go that far." So he can do these really awkward sort of chord progressions and things like that, and I have to do okay, can I just do the normal D A G? And so that's just an observation.
What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I suppose, maybe there's a bit of truth in that. Maybe I do write some more kind of complicated stuff, but at the end of the day, though, it's complicated doesn't always connect. It's all about just putting something together that has a vibe to it.
Did you fight much as kids? Is it about 4 years between you?
No, about 2.5 years between us, isn't there? Yeah. Yeah, we did. Yeah, I suppose there was always sort of blowing hot and cold. As Steve reminded me there, our dad actually bought us pairs of boxing gloves so that when we were belting each other, at least there was some padding there.
Yeah.
When we when we were kids, you know.
I remember, like, we were, I don't know how that came up, who we were chatting to recently, but we were talking about, like, you know, today, like, we all have kids in school and all that, and the whole awareness of bullying and all that, and how to deal with it, and you get letters and books and articles online all about dealing with bullies and all this. And because when we moved down to Ennistimon, we were like these two young lads with Dublin accents, and it was like a year before we moved down there, the town's boxing club shut down. So there was a couple of champion boxers as well. So myself and Joe were getting jumped on and in scraps on a regular basis. And
The irony of it is that all these lads were trained by our uncle Jimmy Wall.
by our father, he was like a
cousin.
my father's cousin. Jimmy Wall trained them, yeah.
Why did the boxing club shut down?
Jimmy Wall just didn't continue with it. You know, he decided not to keep it going.
So you were the punch bags for Ennistimon?
Yeah. So then our dad was working while we were down there. He stayed on in Dublin. He was a furniture salesman in Arnott's on Henry Street. So he'd come down at weekends. And, you know, myself and Joe would be there with bruises and black eyes and scrapes and everything like that. And his response to it was, the shop at the time, we were an agent for the Connacht Laundry. So people left their laundry for dry cleaning. And we had these big, huge sacks for the dirty clothes. So my dad got one of these sacks and he filled it with old clothes and junk and everything like that, and over to the garage, and he hung it up. So it was this kind of makeshift punch bag. He arrived down from Dublin with 2 pairs of boxing gloves, and started training us. And it was like, you've got to learn now how to fight back. And he also did judo when he lived in London. So he arrived down one day, do you remember, with the judo suit on. And we went to the back room, the sitting room, and he started showing us like how to use a man's weight, not meet force with force, and holds, and how to throw somebody, and all this sort of stuff. So that was the response to bullying, was, I'm going to train my sons now. It was like a Clint Eastwood movie. The time has come. You have to know the way of the dragon.
Did you deploy these moves?
Yeah, I think the table started to turn then.
And it doesn't take much. Once they know you've got the chops, they leave you alone.
Yeah.
The other thing too was, as Steve mentioned earlier, we had BBC when we were living in Dublin, so we used to watch all the kung fu movies and David Carradine and all that. And like, you know, after, it was hilarious. Like back then when we lived in Andevlin Road in actually, where was it? Temple Oak, Andevlin Road in Temple Oak, Rathfarnham, and like the kung fu series was on at like whatever it was, 7 o'clock on a Friday evening. And as soon as it was over, you see all the doors open and all the young lads come out and they're doing the high kicks and, you know, all the moves. And we spent our time doing that. So
I remember going to see Fists of Fury down in the cinema down there in Harold's Cross, which is now demolished.
We did deploy the kung fu moves. The lads down in Ennistimon were very much the Queensberry rules, you know, and they didn't see some of these high kicks coming. So we did have that in the back pocket.
How did your mother, the Jackeen, cope with being transplanted to Ennistimon?
Well, that was a big rift for her. I mean, she's like, I suppose she's one of Dublin's greatest fans, isn't she? She's like, she's very much a dub still, and that was a big deal for her. That was a difficult one for her. I think it took her quite a long time.
Because you're a blow-in, no matter how long you move to somewhere, you're a blow-in your whole life.
I think we weren't treated as blow-ins. Our mother probably felt a blow-in, you know, for a long time. But I think because we were there as kids and went to school and all, and you're not really, you're kind of then, you're brought into the fold, so you're not treated like a blow-in any more than, say, a kid that's from there that's sent to boarding school or something like that. You're down there and you're in the thick of it, and you're just with the locals, and you're getting to know people from all walks of life, farmers, people, you know, the sons of the postman,
And you still have a very close relationship with Ennis Diamond. Listen to this, you think there was a rift. There's no rift between you guys and Ennis Diamond. You go and play there all the time. And
we're always promoting Ennis Diamond, and Ennis Diamond is flying at the moment. The town is booming.
They have their eco coffee cup thing.
They have their eco coffee cup. There's a Steiner school that is
the sisters who set that
the Garveys.
The Garveys.
Sinead and. They're amazing. Those girls are amazing. The Garveys. They've got St. Tola's goat's cheese and all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of interesting stuff happening in Clare. All the stuff to do with organic. It's slightly more alternative stuff, organic food producing and all that. The Steiner School in Ennis Diamond is attracting a lot of these different types of families to the area because they want a different sort of education for their kids. So it's changed. It's a different town to what we grew up in, and for the better.
Yeah, that coffee cup thing, is your coffee 50 cent cheaper if you bring your own cup pretty much anywhere in Ennis Diamond?
In Ennis Diamond, it's 30 cent cheaper, and you buy one of these cups, and they're actually made of bamboo. You wouldn't think now, they look like it's a sort of a very firm cardboard or something, and then it has a silicone rubber sort of top on it. But it's a great initiative, and everyone in Ennis Diamond went for it, Bringing your cup.
Are on board with that, which was brilliant,
So the Stunning started out playing the Hilltop as like a dance act, but the thing I still don't understand, Steve, is the waistcoats.
Okay. Well, I had this kind of idea that the Stunning would be like a kind of a nouveau show band. That sort of the whole, with that sort of that old-fashioned philosophy of send them home sweating, that we were very much sort of out to sort of entertain, and the band needed a look. And I remember there was this sort of fancy menswear shop on Shop Street in Galway. I remember taking some of the proceeds of a gig and going down there, and they had these waistcoats that I thought looked like kind of fancy. They were fairly hideous looking back on it, and everybody got one. I was like, put these on, and when we did look like a show band, all right, in retrospect.
Steve somehow managed to try kind of drive that one home. I think a lot of the band were quite unsure, But we did. We kind of looked a bit like James Last support band wearing those waistcoats. But they didn't last too long.
Well, it was otherworldly. So as a teenager, I lived in Ballinasloe. The Water Boys were in Spiddle, which was the most exciting thing in the world that could ever happen. There was a Lark in the Park in Salt Hill. There was 60 by 40 posters for Got to Get Away all over Galway. Owen Foyle's Funk Off Club every Thursday in the Warwick played the coolest music ever. And he was playing Stunning records. And it just, for me as a kid, you were just like this bolt out of blue, this amazing fully formed thing. The first thing I heard was Got to Get Away, fully formed thing. And it just was so exciting that you guys were from Galway. It was just, it really felt like, whoa.
I think we were quite aware of that as well. We weren't aware, we were disappointed. I remember when Got to Get Away, it came out on like 7-inch single. Was there cassettes as well? Got to Get Away? I can't remember.
Think so,
I think it was just 7-inch. It was just vinyl.
Here somewhere.
Well, and I remember it was pressed and all that. I remember we were it was that. I think we were all kind of almost sort of welling up. Our eyes were welling up the day we held it in our hands. When you've been buying records for years and saving up, and then you have your own. It was an amazing buzz. I'll never forget it. And but I remember it was sent out then to all the radio stations. Solid Records released it, and something like maybe 2 or 3 weeks passed, and we never heard it on the radio, and we were gutted. So we did a gig in Salt Hill in a place called O'Connor's, wasn't it? And we split the proceeds of the gig, and the next day we went up to Fahy Travel in Eyre Square, and we bought myself, Joe, Derek, and Jimmy 4 seat-onlys to Faro in Portugal. We'd never
just a trip to Portugal.
We'd never been abroad. We'd never been to like a sunny on a holiday. You know what I mean? So the 4 of us went there, and we were there for 2 weeks. We had the craziest time. It was absolutely hilarious, and that's another story for another day. But when we came back, Pádraig Bourne, who was managing the band at the time, was in Dublin Airport to meet us, and he said, because, nobody had mobile phones. It's like 1988. So he was like, we're trying everything to find where you are. The single is number 17 in the charts, and it's all over the radio. The phone is hopping. Where the fuck were ye? And that was the start of it.
Oh, yeah. And he came back like lobsters from Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Yeah.
Totally
So that was the start of it. Yeah. And then it was like the demand. So next minute we're out and we're gigging all the time. I remember we did a gig then in Cork, in Sir Henry's. What was that called again? They made a documentary about it. RTE made a documentary about it.
Oh no, or the festival or the venue?
In Sir Henry's, they had this...
Something Rocks, wasn't it?
Cork Rocks.
Tony O'Donoghue.
Yeah, Cork Rocks. And Ian Wilson
Tony O'Donoghue, the RTE soccer thing.
Yeah.
He promoted Cork Rocks.
Yeah. And I think 2FM were involved in it because I know Ian Wilson was involved in it as well. And I remember we did that, and the night we played, I think we were on early enough on the Friday evening, and Mark Cagney was a 2FM presenter, and he was emceeing that night. And we played 2:30, and it was probably the first time we played it live. And he came up to me afterwards, and he said, what was that song you played in the middle, the slower one? I said, 2:30. And he said, that's a hit. And we would never have thought that. We thought it's kind of uncool. It's sort of like jazzy, sort of. I remember it was reviewed on the Beatbox one Sunday morning, and Smiley Bulger gave it the thumbs down. He said it was a rip-off of Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. And I was watching the Beatbox, and I go, you bastard! And now I kind of think, you know what? He's actually right.
Oh, it's a lovely song.
And but so we went and we recorded that down in Limerick. With Zerrick Studios in Limerick with Chris O'Brien at the helm. And when it went to radio, Mark Cagney just started playing it off the air, and then everybody was playing it. And then we followed that with Romeo's on Fire, and then Brewing Up a Storm. And when I look at it, it's like, it's no wonder we never got a record deal, because, like, A&R people who would have been sent stuff. I remember sending letters and tapes to record companies, and they would have been scratching their heads going, like, what the fuck do we file this band under?
Well, it was hit after hit after hit. That's the thing. Like, so I have every single one of those 7 inches, and it was just boom, 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 boom. And again, it was just so exciting. It was just the buzz.
The thing is that we, as things took off very fast with the Stunning, and from the point where, like, we had formed in 1987, and we were playing all these cover versions, and we didn't really know what kind of a band we were, or we hadn't written many songs. And then by the time, I'm not sure what year Got to Get Away came out, and it was 88. So in that space of time, we had to write songs and basically be able to play original stuff, and to become more of an original band to back up the single. And so we kind of did our growing up, our sort of musical development in public. There was no sort of like, let's have a master plan here and come up with a kind of a vision for who we are and release a cohesive album. It wasn't anything like that. It was like, you throw out the singles as we write them, more or less, and gig, and the evolution of the band really took place in the public eye. And we did kind of get nailed for that in reviews, that we were accused of being a sort of show band and this, that, and the other.
That's what you wanted, Steve.
Exactly, yeah. And then I remember, getting quite hurt, because I think Bill Graham and Hot Press referred to us as a glorified pub band and all that. Well, okay,
But the thing that amazed me is that, like, again, for me, it very much felt like you were coming from outside of Dublin. You were doing it differently, and that, stuff from outside of Dublin was never viewed as hip as stuff from Dublin.
Yeah,
that's the way I always felt. But you were from Dublin, and
that was the funny thing, because we were being sort of. I remember George Byrne, God rest his soul. George Byrne hated us. And said the most awful things about us, and he had this whole thing. It was like, they're from fucking Galway, and so are those fucking, that pollution, the Saw Doctors, and all George Byrne liked was like 12-string guitars. Anyone that sang like the Byrds or Teenage Fan Club and all that. So he loved Something Happens and all that. Anything that happens kind of west of the Pale, he hated, And I remember when that band came along, what were they called again? They were sort of, they used to always busk in Galway.
Oh my God! I know you're talking about.
Jonna, he lives in New York.
What are they called? Mad busking crowds.
Yeah.
Krusty.
Oh God! Oh, it's
What's the
going
name
to
of
drive
it
me
again?
mad.
But I remember the Dublin journalists absolutely hated them, and then the Frames used to get an awful hammering as well because they were coming out of that sort of almost kind of.
Glenn's mother Catherine would always be saying, I don't know why George write those things about you.
Yeah, I know. But the
But
gas.
he was good at it. George was good at putting people
he
down.
was funny, and I remember years later meeting him at the Electric Picnic, whatever, and we were in the VIP tent. It was like late on a Saturday night, and I ended up kind of in company. He was there, and then whatever happened. The other people that we were there kind of went to the bar or something. Next minute, myself and George were left standing alone, looking at each other. And he said, he looks at me, he goes, he was like really uncomfortable, and he says, "Listen, Steve, you know all that shit in the past." He said, "It just had to be done. It's just work." I said, "No worries, George, no hard feelings." It was like when everyone was gone and we were left, he kind of had to sort of. He wasn't saying sorry, but he was kind of saying, "Goes with the job."
I'll tell you though, George Byrne, do you remember when you couldn't have a table quiz about music in Ireland without George winning it?
Yeah.
Whatever team George was on, he would always win. And ultimately, he had to start setting the questions because it was the only way anyone else could win a table quiz.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing how none of that really affected the band's popularity whatsoever. You know, like we didn't have the journalists on our side at all, but it didn't matter a damn to anybody, and it still doesn't really. You know, people just liked the music, and that was it. You know.
But, I mean, you're such an amazing band, and I never forget the tour we did in 2003, whatever. Yeah. But I remember Derek saying, you'd be doing the set list every night, and Derek would be going, "We just need 2 more hits. 2 more hits. And you had so many hits, Derek, 2 more. And now you have them.
Yeah.
Now you've got these 2 new songs.
Yeah.
Did Chris O'Brien work on one of them? Because I saw Chris
mixed. He mixed about half of the album that's coming out next year.
He did. It's Always You. He mixed the single.
So it's all kind of come full circle again as well.
Yeah. He's done a great job. He's mixed about half the songs in the album. They sound superb. And then Jerry McDonald mixed the rest of them. They sound great. Jerry McDonald mixed Brighten Up My Life. But Brighten Up My Life actually started out as a waltz song. It was one of the first demos myself and Joe recorded after the Stunning split up. So it's been around that long.
Oh, yes.
It's an old tune. It's been around a long time. And when we kind of forgot about it, and we never put it out as a waltz song because we felt it sounded too like the Stunning. And then when we were going down to record stuff a couple of years ago down in Grouse Lodge, Jimmy said, he says, "Lads," he says, "we have to record Brighten Up My Life," because he'd heard the demo and loved it. He says, "We have to record that." And so it was Jimmy that basically made us dust off that and record it. And then it, you know, I actually didn't know what radio were going to make of it, but it was instant with most radio stations. They just loved it because I thought like this could. It's against the grain. There's not much rock and roll on daytime radio. It's a lot of sort of fellas singing in falsetto and kind of that sort of crying voice, singing like a baby crying. You know, I really don't get this new singing style.
But this is insincerity. That's what's driving me. There's so much syrupy insincerity around at the moment.
Absolutely awful. And it's, you know what? It's just, it's facetious. It's actually...
it's insincerity posing as earnestness.
Everything about it, I hate it. And that's why like Liam Gallagher's getting so much traction at the moment, because he's actually the antithesis of all of that. And I love that. And Brighten Up My Life is as well. It's throwaway lyrics, and it's a big, fat, fuck-off rock and roll riff. So in a way, like we wanted to put it out, but we kind of thought, I don't know if radio will actually play this. When you've got people like, you know, you've got the likes of Gavin James and Ed Sheeran and what you call this is a picture this and all this, but very much aiming their songs at young girls, and this is a boy song in some ways, and rock chicks as well love it, and so Today FM actually they went for it and they thought this is right for us, and they playlisted it. And it's gotten like over 300 plays on Today FM.
Oh my God. Yeah. Wow, that's amazing.
Over 1,000 plays nationally in Ireland, which is phenomenal.
That's amazing.
There's hope for us, yeah. There's hope for rock and roll.
Well, I don't think the hope ever faded. I mean, for me now, this new Stunning era is very much a product as well of it getting more of your guys' attention as well, I think. I don't know if that sits with you. Like the fact that you're recording new material, you're devoting new songs to Stunning, for me it's only natural that this would happen, that it gives it all a top up, you know?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes for us as well, it did also enter our minds that this could all just fall flat, that people want to go to a show and they're not interested in the new material. And that's very often the case with a band that's gone back on the road and they've been around. People are going for the nostalgia thing, you know. And then the band go, we're just going to play some new songs, and everyone goes, oh, I'm going to the bar. Whereas in this case, that hasn't happened. I don't quite know why, but I'm glad.
But like, I'm far from decrepit, right? But at the same time, I'm beginning to enjoy like sitting down at gigs.
Yeah.
And I don't think stunning gigs are sit down affairs. Like, are people still able to keep standing? Have you noticed any issues there?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was the Olympia gig we did back in, what date was it? A
few weeks ago.
3 weeks ago. I mean, that was like, the place was heaving. It was and hopping by the end of the night. So
From the minute we walked on stage,
Yeah.
it was a stand-up gig, except for the two balconies. But even they were standing in the balconies.
we've got
From about halfway
like
through.
we've kind of got three generations of people coming to see the band now. You know, there's the original fans who'd be kind of our age, and then there's their sort of like the friends, and then there's their children. And then there was also our children there as well.
But you know, it was a huge one. Do you remember the tour that yourself and Susan promoted back in 2003, the comeback tour? The thing that I think we were totally unaware of was the amount of people that came to that tour, and they knew the Stunning through their older brothers and sisters. They'd grown up from toddlers hearing our music and played in the house, and they were too young to see a gig. And when we used to go down to the merch stall signing CDs and all at the end of the night, the amount of people that we met that said, they all said the same thing: I was too young first time around, but I know all the songs. So that's, all of those people have stayed with us now, and they're coming to the shows, and their kids, and all that. So when Brewing Up a Storm was used on the Euros, the ad for the Euros a couple of years ago, there's this whole new audience. We had friends of ours saying, oh, I was driving the kids to school the other morning and Brewing Up a Storm came on the radio. And I said, that's Steve and Joe. And they were like, what? And a friend of ours, his daughter's learning saxophone, and he got in touch and said, Polly wants, is there any chance she could get the tabs for the solo in Brewing Up a Storm for the saxophone? She's like 12.
And it's kind of funny because kids will never think that anything their parents do or touch or knows is cool in any way, shape or form.
I suppose it's a little bit like what we were talking about earlier, how we were introduced to a lot of music through our aunties and grandparents' record collections. So it's probably the same for them, you know, that the music is just there. And they may, like with some of those people you're talking about now that are coming to the Stunning shows, there could be stuff in the record collections they didn't like, but they liked the Stunning, and they just happen to like the Stunning, and now they're old enough to come to the gigs.
It's amazing though as well that it's the same core lineup, that there's 5 people there that have been there for the whole journey. You know, and there's an amazing chemistry between yourselves and Cormac and Jimmy and Derek, and like that's still there. Like it doesn't feel like you're dragging a dead cat along. Like there's a real energy, there's a real frisson between you that I don't think.
I think one thing that's helped that is that we're not out gigging every weekend. We have a sort of policy. We don't play nightclubs, we don't play bars, we don't, you know, we just play either festivals or dedicated music venues, proper gigs. And we do less gigs because of that, but we do a better quality gig, and it also keeps our fee up there. You know, we're not
scraping the bar.
We're not tarnishing the brand.
Keep the brand alive.
Keeping the brand, yeah. And it's kind of worked actually, and it suits everyone because everyone's doing different things. You know, Joe's teaching, Cormac's teaching and playing with various bands. Derek works with Tommy.
And you're an actor.
And I'm doing it's been a terrible year for me in the acting front. I'd hardly call myself an actor.
2 movies in the last year. How's that terrible?
Well, no, last year. I've worked 2 days this year.
But it comes to ebbs and flows.
God, ebbs and flows. Yeah. Better go and write a few hits, I think.
It's all ebbs. Next year will be the year of the flow. Bring on the flow.
Yeah.
Steve and Joe, thanks a million. Talk to you next week.
Thanks for having us, Donald.
Bye.